Shalom and welcome to this very special programme to mark International Holocaust Memorial Day. And today I have the privilege of interviewing Ivor Perl, who survived Auschwitz-Birkenau, and this is his story.
Many of us learn about the terrible events of the Holocaust, but facts alone are not enough. It's so important to hear survivors' stories because they too speak for the millions of people who weren't permitted to tell theirs. Ivor Perl is 82 and a survivor. In October 2014, I had the honour of meeting him and hearing about his life. He was born into a large family in Mokko, Hungary. Anti-Semitism affected Jewish people there for generations.
It was like an ongoing thing, and it was part of life. I mean, I had to go to school. I had to practically walk the gauntlet, running the gauntlet. I mean, the last thing you did is go back home and tell your parents. And the police were the one who were causing all the problems.
The country was invaded in 1944, and they were forced to leave their home. Moved from ghetto to train and train to camp, the family were pushed apart.
You know what it depended, our life depended on? Instant decision like that, choosing which way to go. I went to one of the groups, my brother went to another group, and my father went to a third group. And I've never seen my father since.
Ivor experienced the terrible conditions of Auschwitz and Dachau.
Out of my family, I told you there were 9 of us, 9 children, and two of my mother and father. So me and my brother survived. He saved me from the jaws of death, literally 3 times, definitely. Trapped
in the children's barracks, where he sheltered from an air raid siren, Ivor was rescued by his brother Alec.
He said, come on Ivor, you got to come out from there. I said, no, I can't, I'm scared. They found out that he tried to escape or something, you're going to be punished bad. I was literally scared. I said, no, come on, you must come out with me. And eventually he took me out. The following morning he woke up and the whole children's block was empty. All the children taken to the gas chamber.
Some things are too cruel to comprehend. He helped him escape the camp hospital, a dreadful place where he was ill with typhus. There was no proper treatment, and had he remained, there was little hope of recovery.
If he wouldn't have been there to help me out, I wouldn't have been, obviously, alive.
Ivor was 12 and a half at the time.
When I saw my granddaughter, you know what the bat mitzvah is?
Yeah.
Well, she was celebrating the bat mitzvah, she was 12 years old. I said, you know something, I was 12, that was the age I was when I was taken to Auschwitz.
In March 1944, there were 700,000 Jews in Hungary, and within 4 months, over half were killed.
Because, I mean, the figures that you're talking about are so enormous, are so horrendous, that it's very hard to comprehend.
One of the most frightening things is the terrible disconnect between the orders being given and the lives they affected.
Have you heard of the Wannsee Agreement? And that's when they got together, a meeting like we have here with cakes and tea, discussing how to dispose of people. What I keep saying is, I fear people more than God. That a day does not go by without some association that happens, whatever it is, of my background. But fortunately, I don't look upon it. Well, I just live.
After the war ended in 1945, Ivor and his brother emigrated to England.
I've had 2 very, very lucky experiences in my life. Number 1, to have survived the Holocaust, and number 2, to have chosen England to be my country. Not only did I feel safe, I felt very, very elated. Honest and truly, I felt I've arrived in heaven.
After arriving in England, Ivor built a life for himself.
I had my own business before I could even read or write or speak English. As soon as we can stand and walk, you have to go and start earning a living.
Ivor has 4 children and 6 grandchildren. His home is filled with family photographs. He has given talks at schools and religious centres about his experiences, but it took years before he was able to talk about the Holocaust, even with his own family.
My wife saying to me that, you know, Ivor, why don't you do something? I managed to get a computer. Said, sit down and sort of tell your story to your children, because I never spoke about it to my children.
He documented his story for them, and it has now reached many other people and touched their lives. Talking about it can be painful, provoking questions that can't be answered.
What has it helped? What has the world learned since 1945? How would I behave if I would have been the Gentile? One week we should be friends playing with us, and the second week they were herding us into a ghetto.
Although, as Ivor says, there will never be another Holocaust, conflict and cruelty continue to happen, and remembrance is so important.
All I can do is talk about, experience what happened, and to tell whoever wants to listen what happens to people who follow that route. And it's like somebody said, you know what, even if there's only one person who has heard either me or somebody else's story and makes a difference, I mean, that alone would be worse to have spoken about it.
Yeah.
The only thing we can do is not to sort of answer hate with hate. It's happened, it's happening, and possibly the human spirit will survive, I hope.
And today is the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau and the 15th anniversary of the International Holocaust Memorial Day. So it was an absolute pleasure. I'm joined today by Ivor Perl, a Holocaust survivor himself. Ivor, very touched by that incredibly moving video describing your life. And thank you so much for being here and having the bravery and the courage to tell your story, which makes a massive difference in people's lives, so that something horrendous as that never happens again. But can we start off with your story? Share with us about the family that you were born into and life growing up in Hungary.
Well, I was born in Hungary to a very, very Orthodox family. My mother, father, 5 boys, 5 brothers, and 4 sisters. And what I remember, although Hungary has got the custom of being anti-Semitic for hundreds of years, but you lived, that was part of your life. Somehow or other, you knew you were Jewish, you could do certain things, and the Gentiles could do other things as well. But some accepted, we lived life like that, of course, until the Germany took over Hungary.
So what was your school like? What was your early life like growing up at school?
School life started off mostly religious one, and also secular one. Saying my school started about 5 o'clock in the morning, getting up 5 o'clock. I'm not quite sure if we had even any sustenance before we left. And in the summer it wasn't too bad, but in winter it was quite sort of hard. I mean, there was no street lights whatsoever. And there was an awful lot of wild animals as well, literally wild animals roaming around. So the journey to the school or religious classes was quite sort of scary at times. And we started off about 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, learned religious studies till about 8, have a breakfast, some sort of breakfast, and then started secular from about 9 till 12 or 1 o'clock, secular lessons, go home for lunch, and then back after lunch again for about 4 or 5 hours of religious studies.
And did you experience any anti-Semitism then as an early age?
Come on. I think the unusual thing was if you didn't experience any anti-Semitism, and it's quite sort of an accepted thing. Of course, I'm talking about at the time when I was going to the classes. But yes, I mean, in fact, we used to, if we were lucky enough, we used to get a few pennies or a few coppers to take to lunch, to take to school to buy a little, whatever it was, and guarding that money in my fist as much as I could. And as often as not, I was accosted by a few non-Jewish boys, asking me, come on, Jew boy, show me what you've got. And of course, as often as not, my money, my few coppers were taken away from me as well.
Horrible. And Ivor, can you tell us about your brothers and sisters and your parents as well?
Well, my father was in the wholesale fruit and vegetable business. And I think because we had a large family, smallish house, as soon as children used to grow up, they used to go away to other places, either to further studies or possibly even to start a life themselves. But life seemed, what I'm saying normal, seemed normal considering what you had to put up with. Sort of going to school in the morning, and if you're accosted or not, if you're not, you were lucky. If you were, you were.
And can you remember the day that the Nazis invaded Hungary
very much so.
in 1944?
Very much so.
Can you describe what you saw, what you feel?
Well, I mean, I'm not so sure. Many people know that Hungary was the Axis power of Germany. And Hungary realized in 1944 they could see the world, if not then, it's lost, but I think the Allies were advancing quite a lot on. And of course they thought to themselves it's pointless keep on being slaughtered by the Allies. They thought they wanted to make peace, try to make peace with the Allies, with the Americans. And of course the Germans found out about that, occupied Hungary overnight, and literally within 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, about 400,000 Jews were taken to the camps. And in fact, the other things I remember as well is, as I mentioned, that the Hungarians were fighting with the Germans. As a young boy of 12 years old, they saw the population, the Gentile population, demonstrating outside the town hall, why don't you bring back our loved ones from the Russian front? And the answer was, we would love to bring them back, we haven't got the infrastructure. Infrastructure to bring them back. And even as a boy, I thought to myself, you haven't got the infrastructure to bring their loved ones from the Eastern Front, or the Western Front, whatever it was. And yet you've got the infrastructure there to take hundreds of thousands of people to their death. I said, what kind of logic can that be?
There must have been an incredible sense of fear amongst you, your family, and particularly being rounded up in the ghettos. Can you share with us your first experience of being forced into the ghettos?
I think the only difference is that the fear was there most of the time. But what happened was when the Germans took over Hungary, that we started being herded into ghettos, and the anti-Semitism was more open than it was in the past. It's quite physical. And of course, the first edict came out that you were not supposed to go out after a certain time, and then you're not supposed to fraternize with non-Jewish people, and then gradually things are getting worse and worse and worse, until we end up in a ghetto, in a small area of the town itself.
And what were conditions like in the ghetto?
Well, conditions were obviously quite horrendous, because, I mean, Hungary in 1944 wasn't a developed country like we talk about it now. So accommodation and food and welfare was very, very hard to come by. And of course, when you had to move out from your place and go into the ghetto, all they could do is go into a certain area and find your own accommodations, which you could. Namely, you used to go to relatives who used to live in there. And needless to say, you tried to live as a normal life you possibly could. But it must have been very, very hard, where the people who used to live there suddenly doubled it in size.
Can you share your experiences of being rounded up and put on one of those horrendous cattle carriages and actually then
surprisingly
transported
enough,
to Auschwitz?
We were rounded up, and the people that we used to play with about 2 weeks earlier on, the not Jewish boys we used to play with, they're the one who rounded us up into the ghetto. Well, the first ghetto that we remember used to be just a playing field, where a tent used to be put up, and we had to be there for a little while. And from there, we were taken into a bigger ghetto, to Szeged, into where it used to be a brick factory. And the rounding up wasn't I'm not saying we went voluntarily, but we accepted the fact that this is our sort of future. And we thought whatever is coming ahead must be better than what we have at the moment. Of course, we were taught that we're going to a camp, or not a camp, somewhere in a town, and from there you're taken east, where you'll have your own plot of land, and you can look after yourself, of which we believed that. And we thought to ourselves, anything must be better than we're going through at the moment. Of course, it turned out entirely different.
So can you describe the conditions actually in the train carriage? Because, I mean, what the Nazis did was horrific, rounding up Jewish people onto the trains, and sometimes 70 or 80 people in one carriage alone.
Very, very much so. And surprising enough, there's even a story to that, because when we first went from our place to the main ghetto, people started rushing. And my mother and the sister, they said, well, what's the point of rushing? Let's wait till everybody's there and we can go on to the track afterwards. And the same thing when we arrived in the other ghetto, that we waited and everybody went disembarked from the trains, and we followed after that. But of course, the space was limited. All the nicer places were taken up by then. So all we had left was practically outside the actual building itself. And overnight it was raining. So of course the next time we thought, if there's going to be any transport away from the ghetto itself, we'll be the first one to rush to take the transport. And that happened. But as luck would have it, there were 3 transports that left the camp where I was. We were on the first one because we wanted to be the first one to go on there. And that's the only transport that ended up in Auschwitz, where 90% of the people were exterminated. And the other 2 transport went over to Theresienstadt, which is supposed to be in the showplace for the Nazis, of showing it to the world that the Jews are not being treated too badly.
So how long, can you remember how long the train journey was?
Well, my brother said it was about 4 days, but I think it must have been about 5 or 6 days. But I don't think it mattered, because the conditions on the train itself were horrendous. All there were 2 buckets either side of the cattle truck, which was 80 or 90 people on there. One was with water, and then one was for ablution. Now, one can imagine, for days on end, being on a condition like that, what it must have been like over there. But the only thing I remember, just lying on the floor of the cattle truck and seeing in the cracks of the train, seeing the sleepers rolling by clickety-click. And the only thing I thought about at the time was, oh, is it wonderful, I'm going on a train ride at the moment.
And then when you arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau, you were given warning by many of the Polish Jews working on the railway line.
Obviously, as I said before, the propaganda was very well done by the Germans. We thought we were going somewhere, I don't know where, never realizing where we would end up. And of course, when we stopped at a place called Auschwitz, which we found out afterwards what it was, the people working on the line, outside the railway lines, and they kept on shouting something, the striped uniforms, and they kept on shouting in Yiddish, which is very akin to German, saying that don't save any food, eat all the food you can, and if children, if asked how old they are, they must say they're at least 16 years old. We had that was only what we heard. We had no idea what, when, or why. And of course, soon as the doors would open up, you tumbled out from the cattle truck. The scene that greeted you was horrendous. Women and children one side, boys and men the other side.
And what were your first impressions when you actually disembarked from the train?
Well,
can you describe what you actually saw?
Well, the thing which I remember, the terrible stomach upset, tummy ache, not upset, tummy ache, and I just fell onto the floor and just looked around you and see the scene, the shouting, the screaming, and the dogs barking, and the SS walking about with the gun shouting giving orders quicker, whatever it was. And when we started marching forward, I ran over to my mother, to the women and children side, and I said, Mummy, can I come with you? She said, no, darling, go on, you go back to your brothers. You know, you never had the luxury of complaining or arguing. I mean, things were happening so fast and so quickly. And of course, I went back to my brother, where my brother was. And of course, as you started marching towards the front, you could see an SS officer with white gloves on pointing left or right. And he came to me, and he suddenly stopped. He said, how old are you? It's German, which is very akin to Yiddish. Now, I think to this day that had I not learned that the religious education we were taught in Yiddish, I would not have understood what that man said to me. He said, saying, you should say that your children should be older. So I said I was 16. I was rather bigger for my age than the normal. And then it's all right, he pointed to the right. Had I not understood what the man said before, no way would I have survived. Because I said I was 12 years old.
And that man himself, was it Dr. Mengele?
I'm not sure. They say it was Dr. Mengele. But I thought, thinking to myself, does it matter who it was? I think he said it was Dr. Mengele.
Absolutely frightening. So what happened when you were then separated?
Well, then we were separated. We started marching. We had no idea what when. And we ended up in a big hangar, which was a shell house. And in front of that, they said, there are benches along there. Take all your clothes, put it nice and neatly in a corner. You'll go through a shower. You come out the other end. You get your clothes back nice and neatly washed or whatnot. Needless to say, obviously we wanted to believe anything they were told, we want to believe it so. But of course we ended up in this shower room at a big, enormous hangar, which must have been hundreds of people there, and people running around all naked, women, children one side, or just women one side, and big older men and young boys the other side. Now for us, that itself was a terrible thing, because to seeing naked people, especially the opposite sex, was very, very sort of anathema to us.
And also, you were given a number, weren't you? And you were told to remember that.
That was afterwards. And of course, all that took hours and hours on end. And eventually, when all was finished, of course, we got out to the other end. We were given new uniforms, like striped cotton clothes to wear, and marching along. Eventually, we ended up in a barrack. And in that barrack, there was this capo. Don't know if you heard of the word capo.
Yeah.
That's it. And he stood up on the middle of the plinth of the block. I said, gather around here. So we gathered around there. Now, before anything else happened, all you could see is somebody screaming and shouting, being dragged into the barrack, spread-eagled and being punched terribly. And I think whether he did something wrong enough, I don't know. But what he said was, remember now, this is what will happen to you if any trouble that you cause if you don't follow rules right away. So of course we realized that something is, you know, more than just an ordinary camp or whatever it was. And he said that, remember, you arrived at a place called Auschwitz. Never forget that. And that's when I started crying. And somebody came over to me and said, why are you crying? I said, I want to see my mummy. So he said, oh, don't worry, you'll see her tomorrow. But somehow or other, something took hold of me, and I realized, you know what, nothing is what I thought it was. I thought it was like an adventure going from here to there, that things won't be the same from now on. And you were taken into the barrack, and the following day, they said, you have to queue up to have your number, which you were given a number, tattooed on your arm. And I think it must have been about 20 people in front of me, and suddenly the SS chap, the SS man who watched the tattooist putting the numbers on the arm, said, "You'll have to come back tomorrow because you've run out of ink." Says, right. So we went back the following morning, we queued up again, and literally with about 10 people in front of me, the air raid siren went. And the rule was, as soon as the air raid siren went, you had to disappear from the open ground. So they said, go away and come back afterwards, and you get the number tattooed afterwards. But needless to say, that what happened when he came back and he said, "No, I'm sorry, we haven't got time." The well, we didn't know that, but the Russians were coming very closer to Auschwitz. They said, "You'll be shipped over to Germany, and you have the number tattooed in Germany afterwards." Now, as efficient the Germans were, I don't know what happened, but I never had the number tattooed on my arm.
Amazing. That's incredible. And Ivor, can you share with us how your brother played a big role in saving your life and actually getting you out of the...
Well, of course, hunger was a very, very prominent thing in your mind all the time. And the rule was that there wasn't much work that was being done in Auschwitz. Like I said, it was an extermination camp more than anything else, Birkenau. But they said the people who volunteered to do some sort of ground, some work, I'm not quite sure what it was, on Sunday morning, it's up to you that as a present, as a payment for your work, you can come back through the kitchen from the SS kitchen and lick out the cauldrons of the kitchen for the SS food. But of course, everybody wanted to do that. And I volunteered as well, but my luck would have it. Of course, another air raid came along. We had to rush back into the camp before we had the chance of going through to the kitchen. So we ended up being locked up again in a block, a children's block.
When did you, because you're only 12 when you arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau, when did you realise that Auschwitz-Birkenau was actually a Nazi death camp and the gassing of Jewish...
I think it's like I said before, when I started crying in the barrack after the washing, that I sensed, I realised, I sensed that something was not what it was. And of course, when he went out from there, you saw the chimneys from the gas chambers also, and you asked people what it was. Some people said the truth, the burning people, and others said, no, it's the baker. The bakers are over there. But I think it was more like a feeling than knowledge, because everything was tried to be very, very, very sort of surreptitiously, rather than you didn't know much. Obviously, you couldn't know much. More like what we felt.
And can you tell us the incredible role that your brother Alec played in actually rescuing you? One from the children's camp.
You mentioned about 3 times. One of them was when we came back from when I volunteered to go out to do some work and come back which I had to come back quickly. And the first place that was undercover was a children's block. So I ended up in a children's block. And of course, when the all clear came, the door wouldn't open up. So we started shouting and screaming, why don't you open up the door? Well, we didn't know why. And suddenly, about 3 doctors, so we had white overalls on them, came along and we said we had to undress and walk past them. That's when we realized that something else was happening. And my brother found out where I was. And there was a window at the top. He kept on shouting at me, come out from there. I said, like I said on the film, so I can't, I'm scared. Anyway, somehow or other, he pulled me out from there. And as we said before on the film, that the whole block was taken overnight. That was number 1. And number 2, also we mentioned about the time when I wasn't well, we taken the hospital block. Now, on the film, it showed you bed, but we didn't have beds. All we had was just bunk with straws, if you were lucky, but a straw on there. And there was also that my brother came over there and said, come on, Ivor, let's go out from here. You've got to come out. I said, no, I'm scared. but he dragged me out from there.
Amazing.
That's the second time.
Amazing guy. And also, can you share with us what happened when you became very ill and had to go into the hospital with typhoid?
That was at the time, but I had typhus. I remembered how delirious I was, and I kept on thinking, oh, I'd love to have some drink, some water. But the only medication you had, I think, in the hospital block, I think, was burnt bread, practically like charcoal. That's all. That's the only medication, if there was medication.
Yeah. And your brother, Alec, also rescued you from the hospital?
Yes, from there as well. And also, while I was there, that the rule was that in the morning and in the evening, you had to completely pull up your shirt, and the doctor used to go by and kept on pointing, meaning that those people who will not get well or were too thin to anything were taken away to be exterminated. And that's when also he came there with a friend, with another Polish chap who carried me away from there.
So how much do you owe your life to your brother, Alec? And he must have been very savvy, he must have been very much...
Well, he was only 2 years older than I am, but of course 2 years at that stage must have meant an awful lot. I wasn't even 13 yet, and he was 15 or 14 and a half. And, you know, I think nature takes over. You did things purely by instinct. I mean, we were too young and too inexperienced and too lack of anything, knowledge of anything there to what will happen was purely instinct.
So let's have a look now at this report that's produced by Yad Vashem that looks at the horrible, absolutely horrific conditions in Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Auschwitz-Birkenau was the largest extermination center created by the Nazis. It has become the symbol of the Holocaust and of willful, radical evil in our time. The album you will see presented here is known as the Auschwitz album, and it is the only surviving visual evidence of the process of mass murder at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The album is unique. There is not a similar album of its kind in the entire world. It documents, in photos from every direction and from every angle, the arrival at Auschwitz, the selection of those slated for immediate death and of the few who were destined to be slave laborers, the confiscation of their property, and the preparation for the physical annihilation of a transport of Jewish people. This transport of Hungarian Jews from the area of Carpatho-Ruthenia arrived at the ramp of the extermination camp Auschwitz-Birkenau in May 1944. In the photos, we see the men, women, and children step out of the overcrowded train, traumatized and fearful after their horrendous journey. They have no clue that they have just been delivered to a death factory and that few of them will survive. Survivor and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Elie Wiesel described his arrival as a teenager at Auschwitz. Every yard or so, an SS man held his gun trained on us. Hand in hand, we followed the crowd. Men to the left, women to the right. 8 words spoken, indifferently, without emotion. 8 short, simple words. For a part of a second, I glimpsed my mother and my sister moving to the right. I saw them disappear into the distance, while I walked on with my father and the other men. I did not know that at that place, at that moment, I was parting from my mother and my sister forever. The selection process carried out by SS doctors and wardens took place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as train after train unloaded its human cargo. Most Jews were sent immediately to the left, to their death. The undressing rooms of the gas chambers were not sufficient for the masses of Hungarian Jews who arrived daily in the summer of 1944. They therefore had to wait until the undressing rooms were ready to absorb them. The common waiting place was the grove closest to the crematorium, that would soon turn their bodies to ash. They were told to sit among the trees and wait for further instructions. These were their last peaceful moments together before being driven into the gas chambers and murdered. It has been said that there will never be people as innocent as the victims on the threshold of the gas chambers. The SS kept the victims destined for gassing in complete ignorance of what lay in store for them. They were told that before being placed in the camp, they had to be disinfected and washed. They would soon discover that what they had assumed were the shower areas were actually hermetically sealed gas chambers. A minority of Jews was selected for forced labor. Their personal belongings were confiscated, their hair was shaved, and a registration number was tattooed on their left arm. In the words of survivor and author Primo Levi, "For the first time we became aware that our language lacks words to express this offense, the demolition of a man. It is not possible to sink lower than this. Nothing belongs to us anymore. They have taken away our clothes, our shoes, even our hair. If we speak, they will not listen to us, and if they listen, they will not understand. They will even take away our name, and if we want to keep it, we will have to find in ourselves the strength to do so." It is in this way that one can understand the double sense of the term extermination camp. The work of sorting the possessions that the Jews brought with them to Auschwitz was done by Jewish prisoners who were forced to collect the packages and sort the items that would then be sent to the Reich. By the time the sorting was completed, most of the previous owners were already dead. No memory of the men, women, and children that were deemed valueless upon their arrival remains in camp records. This album is the sole witness to their fate. The Auschwitz album was discovered after the war by Lily Jacob, a survivor of the transport pictured here. Lily gave the album to Yad Vashem, where she knew that its tragic contents would be safeguarded for posterity and shared with generations to come.
All I can say is that's just absolutely unimaginable, but Ivor, you were there. Seeing those horrendous pictures, does that bring back memories of the reality of what you saw?
Very, very much so. But it's not only that. I feel as though when I speak about that, I try to not to make it horrible, because I feel as though people will get fed up with it too soon. I can never describe it like that, because you've just seen that, the sight was just seen.
And Ivor, we saw that in it was in January 1945 that Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated, but you and your brother were forced on what was known as the Death March to Germany. Can you describe the day that you were forced out of Auschwitz?
Oh, no, but from Auschwitz were left to be taken to Germany for our different camps for slave labor, but of course we were outside the Dachau camps that when the Americans are coming nearer and nearer, they had to obliterate all the sign of the camps. That's why we went on this death march, which were also just given a loaf of bread each, and not knowing where, how far, and when we were taken, where we would arrive. And that's when we arrived at Dachau itself.
So how far do you think you walked? How many days walk can you?
It must have been about 4 days, 3 or 4 days. Talk about in 1945 in March of 1945 in Tyrol. You can imagine conditions, the circumstances we were in there. And in fact, we're there as well. It's been a very, very tragic memory I have on there. But my brother and I started fighting over somebody. He said somebody else took a bigger bite of bread than he should have done. And we just struggling and fighting ourselves in the mud. And that's when we saw the butt of a rifle and the German boot as we picked our head up. And the German soldier said to us in Hungarian, which is absolutely astounding to hear Hungarian from him, and said, "Why are you fighting? You're not supposed to fight." He said, "We're not fighting, we're brothers." He says, "I'm Hungarian myself, I heard you were fighting." He says, "Don't fight, you'll soon be liberated, and you'll be sorry that you've ever fought with each other." And I can literally say that out of my whole experience of the Holocaust, that was the only kind word I've heard from the enemy in my whole time going through the Holocaust.
And can you describe the conditions when you arrived at Dachau?
Well, when we arrived at Dachau, suddenly the transport stopped just outside the camp for quite a few hours. And this is what we found out afterwards, that what happened was that apparently the general of the camp was given orders to take us to the Tyrol Mountains, which is not too far from Dachau, to be exterminated. Of course, he saw here afterwards that he decided that he's not going to execute that order because he might be accused of a crime. And so we went to the commandant in Dachau itself. He said, "Well, I've got no room for any more people inside the camp." He said, "All right, we'll have to encamp outside in the parade ground, in the open." Of course, we were there for, I think, overnight, and the shell started, which we didn't know where from. The shells from the gun started hitting the fence, and there was a hole in there, and people started running through it. And my brother said to me, "Come on, Ivor, let's go." I said, no, I'm scared. We're going to be, the guards will shoot at us. And sure enough, as we started running towards the hole, the machine guns opened up. And of course, we all ran back to the open field, to the open ground. But the following morning, the same thing happened again. And by that time, we thought, well, we don't care, we're going to take our chance. And of course, by that time, the guards sort of ran away. And that's when we ran out through the hole.
And this is where you met your American liberators.
Yes.
Can you describe that feeling of meeting those American soldiers that helped liberate you?
Well, when we were running away from the camp itself, we had to go past an anti-aircraft battery. But of course, once we saw the aircraft battery, we were a bit frightened again, thinking there were still soldiers there. But of course, they all ran away by then. So we found a dead rabbit. That's not too far from there. I don't know how it was. Anyway, we picked it up, and there was a barrack near there, a hut near there. So we went in there. The two other people there, where we had our first decent meal for Lord knows how long. And there were two beds there as well, with straw and sheets on there, which of course something that hasn't happened to us for over a year. And we fell asleep. And suddenly there were knocks on the door. And of course we were terrified. Of course we saw there were the Germans there. We looked through the window, and there was an older man. They said, "No, they're not Germans. I have a feeling they're the Allies, the Americans." Of course, we opened up the door, being frightened, and there were a few American soldiers there looking absolutely horrified at us. And as a kind of a peace offering, we wanted to offer them part of the stew from the dead rabbit that we had. And they said, no, all right, go on, go back to sleep, or go back to there.
Amazing. And we're down to the last few minutes of the programme, Ivor, so I have two very important questions for you. The first is, how did you arrive in England, and what was that like?
Oh, that's a very, very, very important time to... Well, what happened was that when the camps were liberated, the world could see what happened to us, and the whole world felt very sorry for us. And quite a few other countries were prepared to give us visas to go over there. But of course, being the youngest ones, children, there was quite a strong Zionist organization in the camp. And they said that, look, as far as they're concerned, after what happened to the Jews, anybody elderly can go back wherever they want to, but children who've got no parents can only go to Palestine. We were not allowed to go anywhere else but Palestine, which was quite happy to do so. But of course, Palestine was under the British mandate. And they said, no, I'm sorry, you can't. We got the mandate, no, we can't. They won't allow you to go there. But they said, well, I don't care what you do, but you will not go anywhere else. So they said, well, all right, we've got permission for 1,000 children. The British government gave the refugee organisation permission for 1,000 children to be rescued and taken to England, of which they only found 732. But even that itself, we were organised into groups, and we were given to understand that, look, we have to leave the camp, but the Zionist organisation, who said they're not allowed children to go other than Palestine, mustn't know about that. So I think surreptitiously, middle of the night, a few American lorries turned up, and about, I think, 150 of the children managed to go onto the lorry in the dark of night, and they ended up at Munich airport. And then there was a whole commotion again at Munich airport. So what happened was that England was fog-bound. So the RAF the planes couldn't take off. And then they said, well, what can we do? We can't go back to the camp, because otherwise if the political people will find out, there'll be murders going on there. So fortunately, there was a nunnery not too far from there, and they took us in for a couple of nights while waiting for the fog to clear, which I must say was wonderful experience. Lovely and friendly they were to us.
And you made the news back in May of 2015 when you were to give evidence against the SS guard
Oscar Groening.
Oscar Groening, known as the bookkeeper of Auschwitz.
Well, first of all, I had a phone call from a high-class lawyer from Germany, and they said, "Do you understand you're a Hungarian survivor?" I said, "Yes." So you've got this Oscar Groening, who's quite, well, not happy, prepared to be prosecuted for all the deeds that you did in the camps. So I said, well, look, as far as I'm concerned, I'm quite happy to give you evidence in England, but I won't go to Germany. So he said, well, you know, Mr. Perl, it's a shame, because this might be the last chance to see a SS man being put on trial. It's a shame you can't be there permanently yourself. But nevertheless, fair enough, we can make arrangements for you to swear an affidavit in front of a lawyer. And I said, all right. But I mentioned that to the children. My children said, you know, that this is, no, you've got to go there. You have to go there, as much as it hurts, pains you. And I phoned him back and I said, yes, all right, I'm prepared to go and visit him, or rather, appear for the... But even then was quite an experience. Sitting in a courtroom, dozens of reporters, judges and lawyers and whatnot, and suddenly my daughter, who accompanied me, because I couldn't have gone without her, she said, Dad, look, he's here. And I picked my eyes up, and I could see a frail old man. I had two nurses, one either side of him, and two lawyers behind him, just crawling into the... And suddenly he said, that's him. And suddenly he said, well, that's the SS man. And literally, I could feel my hatred just draining from me. And I think to myself, you have to excuse my word now. I said, you bastard, why didn't you come in here with your uniform, with your Jack's boot, that I could hate you? Now that you're here like another human being, I find my hatred is gone.
And also, Ivor, you back in 2018, you revisited Auschwitz for the first time with your family. What was that like, knowing that you had actually defeated the Nazis, that you've got your family of your own?
Yeah, quite so.
And you could go back.
I tried not to go back to Germany, obviously. For various reasons, I had to go. It's called March of the Living. And I did go back. And you know what? There were 5 coaches of people going from England alone, and each coach had a survivor on board. And I thought to myself, you know, Ivor, it's going to take 6 days before this whole thing is over. each day I'll have a bucket full of tears for the journey which is going to bring back memories. But surprisingly enough, every single day I felt, I wouldn't say elated, but I certainly didn't feel like crying until the end. And when towards the end of the 6th day, walking away from Auschwitz, there was a detachment of Israeli police singing, holding an art scroll in the sacred law of the Jewish thing. And my son said to me, Dad, look at that. What are they doing? They're singing and holding a scroll, a sacred scroll. So I ran back to them and I said to them, do you mind if I give that a kiss, the Holy Scripture? They said, why? Why do you want to do that? He said, I'm a survivor. I was here during... I said, what? He said, no, come on. You get hold of it yourself. And which my son has filmed it. And my son said to me, Dad, how do you feel like now? And he said, I feel like crying because I've never cried. I never shed tears in my eyes. So he said, Dad, why don't you cry now? There's your opportunity. I said to my son, I said, I wouldn't give them the pleasure of me crying tears.
Ivor, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your remarkable and compelling and powerful story with us today. And thank you that you're alive. Thank you that you shared with what to remind us of the lessons of history, that if we ignore the rise of Jew hatred, then we know the consequences not only for the Jewish people, but also for the rest of the world. And that's why as Christians, we need to stand up for the Jewish people. We need to stand up for Israel, and we have to say, never, never again. So thank you for watching this special edition of The Late Show to mark the International Holocaust Memorial Day.